You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. The Agile mindset is not a set of slogans, but a living orientation that turns abstract values into daily decisions and trade-offs. Each value of the Agile Manifesto becomes a lens for behavior in contexts that are uncertain, complex, and rapidly shifting. Principles offer further granularity, translating orientation into specific habits of delivery. For exam candidates, it is important to understand how these ideas move from theory into action, because scenarios often test practical application rather than memorization. For practitioners, the Agile mindset becomes a way of interpreting situations. When faced with ambiguity, the mindset provides direction: focus on people, prioritize collaboration, favor working outcomes, and adapt when reality changes. This foundation ensures that agility is not a veneer of rituals, but a disciplined, value-driven practice that sustains relevance and quality in turbulent environments. The value of individuals and interactions over processes and tools translates into practices that privilege trust, clarity, and frequent collaboration. While processes and tools are useful, they are not the drivers of insight and creativity. People are. For example, a co-located team may solve a critical problem in a 15-minute conversation that would have taken days through tool-driven workflows. In distributed environments, intentional daily touchpoints replicate this immediacy. The principle does not dismiss process but places it in service of people, not the other way around. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios about balancing strict adherence to tools versus enabling discussion. The Agile response usually favors human connection as the engine of progress. The emphasis is clear. Agility thrives when people are trusted and encouraged to interact openly and effectively. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation reframes stakeholder engagement as co-creation rather than adversarial bargaining. Instead of debating fixed scope, teams and stakeholders align continuously on outcomes. This means stakeholders are partners in prioritization and decision-making, shaping not only what gets built, but how success is defined. For instance, instead of arguing whether a feature is in scope, teams invite stakeholders into refinement discussions to explore options. This transparency reduces surprises and builds trust. On the exam, candidates may encounter scenarios where stakeholders push for rigidity. The Agile response usually emphasizes collaboration and shared discovery. Contracts still matter, but collaboration ensures they serve as guardrails, not as barriers. Agile replaces adversarial postures with joint exploration, recognizing that stakeholder partnership is critical to delivering real value. Working product as the primary measure of progress focuses attention on increments that demonstrate value rather than on speculative documentation or plans. Agile teams prioritize producing potentially releasable outputs, even if small, because these provide evidence of progress and invite feedback. For example, releasing a functioning login feature says far more about advancement than producing a 100-page requirements document. This principle also builds stakeholder confidence by showing tangible movement. On the exam, questions about tracking progress often test whether candidates value working increments over proxies like activity reports. The correct Agile approach usually emphasizes delivering something usable and inspectable. Agile reminds us that progress is not theoretical. It is visible, observable, and customer-facing. Responding to change over following a plan emphasizes that replanning is normal, not a sign of failure. Plans are valuable, but they are hypotheses about the future, not immutable contracts. When evidence arises that priorities should shift, Agile teams adapt without clinging to sunk costs. For example, if market feedback shows low adoption of a feature, the backlog may pivot toward more pressing needs. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios where teams resist altering plans. The Agile response usually highlights adaptation as the principled choice. Agility recognizes that plans are only as good as the data supporting them, and data changes over time. Replanning demonstrates responsiveness, not weakness, and ensures resources remain aligned with value. Early and continuous delivery favors thin, end-to-end slices of functionality that surface integration issues and generate real feedback. Instead of waiting months to release a complete product, Agile teams deliver incremental progress from the start. For instance, releasing a small but usable subset of a reporting dashboard validates both technical integration and customer appetite. Continuous delivery reduces risk by spreading discovery across iterations and reassures stakeholders by showing constant movement. On the exam, scenarios about delivery cadence often hinge on whether teams should release early. The Agile answer usually favors incremental delivery as a path to faster learning and reduced uncertainty. Agile values cadence over accumulation, ensuring that every cycle produces observable value. Welcoming evolving requirements reframes new information as opportunity rather than disruption. Requirements shift because markets, users, and technologies evolve, and Agile teams embrace this reality. Adaptation occurs within guardrails like time boxes and definitions of done, ensuring that change does not destabilize flow. For example, a team may welcome a late-breaking user insight into backlog refinement, adjusting scope without derailing delivery cadence. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios where requirements change midstream. The Agile response usually emphasizes incorporating new information safely within established structures. Agility is about leveraging change to improve value, not resisting it to preserve predictability. This mindset converts uncertainty into competitive advantage. A frequent cadence of delivery and review creates predictable opportunities for feedback, decision, and adjustment. Instead of ad hoc, reactive exchanges, Agile teams rely on time-boxed intervals, like sprints, reviews, or demos. This rhythm creates trust by ensuring stakeholders know when to expect evidence and when they will have input. For example, a bi-weekly review session guarantees stakeholders a voice in shaping priorities, reducing the likelihood of late-stage surprises. On the exam, cadence often appears in scenarios about engagement. The Agile response usually emphasizes creating regular feedback opportunities rather than sporadic communication. Predictable cadence aligns with empiricism, embedding inspection and adaptation into the calendar of delivery. Daily collaboration across roles ensures that decisions occur closest to the work, reducing delay and escalation. By bringing developers, testers, analysts, and product owners together every day, issues surface quickly and can be addressed on the spot. For example, a dependency blocking deployment can be discussed and resolved within hours rather than waiting for formal escalation chains. This daily interaction minimizes waste and accelerates flow. On the exam, candidates may encounter questions about communication breakdowns. The Agile answer usually emphasizes daily cross-role collaboration, showing that decision-making should be integrated into work rhythm rather than siloed. Agile recognizes that speed and quality improve when expertise converges daily, not only at milestones. Motivated individuals form the core of Agile effectiveness. Teams thrive when goals are clear, leadership is supportive, and autonomy is granted within explicit boundaries. Motivation is not manufactured by pressure, but by trust and clarity. For example, a team given autonomy to organize tasks while being supported by leadership to remove impediments feels ownership and pride. On the exam, scenarios about performance often hinge on whether teams are empowered. The Agile response usually emphasizes conditions that nurture motivation rather than directives or threats. Agility recognizes that people are not interchangeable resources. They are creative problem solvers who excel when supported and respected. High bandwidth communication maximizes clarity and minimizes rework. Agile favors concise, intentional exchanges over long, formal documents. This does not mean eliminating documentation, but ensuring that information is conveyed in the clearest, fastest way. For example, a direct conversation or shared whiteboard session may achieve alignment faster than a lengthy specification. In distributed teams, tools like video calls, collaborative boards, and shared terminology maintain bandwidth even without physical proximity. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios about resolving misunderstandings. The Agile answer usually emphasizes high bandwidth approaches, showing that communication quality matters more than formality. Agile communication reduces noise and accelerates shared understanding. Progress evidence emphasizes user-observable behavior and acceptance outcomes. Rather than tracking hours worked or tasks completed, Agile measures success by what the customer can see and use. For example, demonstrating that a feature works in production conveys progress far more meaningfully than showing a percentage of completion in a tracker. Evidence aligns conversations around fitness for purpose, not just effort expended. On the exam, scenarios about reporting progress often test whether candidates can identify the most meaningful metric. The Agile response usually emphasizes working increments that customers can inspect. Agile reminds practitioners that activity is not progress, value delivered is. Sustainable pace ensures that teams preserve quality, reliability, and creativity. Short bursts of overtime may appear productive but degrade long-term performance. Agile emphasizes pacing that can be maintained indefinitely, protecting both delivery and morale. For example, a team that regularly works 70-hour weeks may deliver initially but will burn out, producing defects and turnover. Sustainable pace preserves energy and prevents erosion of trust. On the exam, sustainable pace often appears in scenarios about delivery under pressure. The correct Agile response usually involves adjusting scope or cadence rather than forcing unsustainable effort. Agility requires endurance, and sustainable pace is the foundation of reliable, resilient delivery. Technical excellence and good design are not luxuries but enablers of adaptability. Practices like refactoring, automated testing, and coherent architecture reduce defect risk and make change easier. For example, code that is modular and tested allows new features to be added without destabilizing the system. Investing in excellence reduces future cost, enabling agility. On the exam, technical excellence often appears in scenarios about balancing speed with quality. The Agile answer usually emphasizes building quality into the product, recognizing that neglecting design creates technical debt that slows delivery. Agile values adaptability, and adaptability depends on technical foundations that support rapid, safe change. Simplicity in Agile practice means maximizing the amount of work not done. It encourages teams to eliminate non-essential scope, ceremony, and coupling that slow adaptation. For example, if a feature does not directly serve a customer outcome, it may be excluded from the backlog. Simplicity also applies to processes. A daily stand-up should be concise, focused on value, not bloated with unnecessary detail. On the exam, simplicity often appears in questions about prioritization or scope. The Agile answer usually emphasizes focusing on essentials and deferring or discarding the rest. Simplicity is not minimalism for its own sake, but intentional focus on what matters most. It ensures energy is spent delivering value rather than managing unnecessary complexity. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Self-organizing teams embody the principle that those closest to the work are best positioned to make decisions about how it should be accomplished. When teams are given clear problems to solve, context about constraints, and trust to decide their tactics, they design better approaches than top-down mandates can provide. For example, instead of prescribing task assignments, a leader can set a sprint goal and allow the team to distribute work among themselves. This autonomy fosters ownership, creativity, and accountability. On the exam, scenarios about team empowerment often test whether candidates recognize that self-organization is more effective than micromanagement. The Agile answer usually emphasizes enabling teams with context and purpose while trusting them to decide how to deliver. Self-organization reflects the mindset that agility is powered by trust in people, not control of process. Regular reflection and adjustment turn agile principles into continuous improvement. Retrospectives provide a structured, recurring opportunity for teams to observe their performance, identify strengths and weaknesses, and implement small, concrete changes. These adjustments might include adopting new tools, refining estimation practices, or altering meeting formats. The key is that reflection is not occasional, but embedded into the cadence of delivery. For example, a team noticing recurring defects might decide to increase automated testing coverage in the next sprint. On the exam, scenarios about quality or flow often test whether candidates understand the importance of deliberate retrospection. The Agile response usually emphasizes continuous adjustment based on observation. Agility is not static. It grows stronger through repeated cycles of reflection and adaptation. Risk management in Agile differs from traditional upfront-heavy approaches. Instead of attempting to eliminate all risk before work begins, Agile teams reduce exposure by limiting batch sizes, keeping work in process low, and validating assumptions early. For example, testing a small increment with real users surfaces flaws quickly, reducing the chance of late, catastrophic surprises. Agile risk management is proactive, but distributed across iterations rather than centralized in a planning phase. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios where risk appears late in delivery. The Agile response usually emphasizes slicing and validation as safeguards against large-scale failure. Risk in Agile is managed through structure and cadence, not through prediction alone. The mindset accepts uncertainty while systematically reducing its impact. Compliance and governance are often seen as barriers to agility, but in practice, they can be integrated into flow. Rather than creating stop-and-start gates that detach oversight from delivery, Agile teams embed evidence, traceability, and validation into increments. For example, a regulated team might capture compliance artifacts during backlog refinement, or include regulatory checks in the definition of done. This integration ensures that compliance is maintained without halting progress. On the exam, candidates may encounter scenarios about regulated environments. The Agile answer usually emphasizes incremental, evidence-based compliance rather than large, end-loaded validation. Agile shows that adaptability and compliance are not opposites but can coexist when oversight is woven into the rhythm of delivery. Stakeholder partnership extends collaboration into ongoing co-creation of value. Customers, sponsors, and end users are not distant evaluators, but active participants in backlog refinement, reviews, and prioritization. Their insights continuously shape sequencing and definitions of success. For example, a stakeholder may reprioritize backlog items after seeing an early demo, preventing wasted effort on low-value features. Partnership ensures alignment between delivery and real-world needs. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios about disengaged or late-involved stakeholders. The Agile response usually emphasizes ongoing partnership from the beginning. Agility recognizes that value is maximized when stakeholders are embedded in discovery and decision-making, turning delivery into a shared journey rather than a unilateral output. Forecasting and planning in Agile contexts rely on empirical flow metrics and scenario ranges rather than fixed predictions. Instead of promising precise delivery dates, teams use throughput, cycle time, and velocity data to provide honest guidance. They may offer probabilistic ranges such as, with 85% confidence, this feature set can be delivered within the next 3 sprints. This approach acknowledges uncertainty while still supporting decision-making. On the exam, scenarios about planning often test whether candidates understand the difference between aspiration and evidence. The Agile answer usually emphasizes using empirical data to ground forecasts. Forecasting becomes an ongoing activity, updated as new data emerges, rather than a one-time commitment. This transparency builds trust with stakeholders, who can make informed decisions based on reality. Product discovery is integrated with delivery so that exploration, validation, and build occur in parallel rather than sequentially. Instead of isolating discovery at the beginning of projects, Agile teams continuously test assumptions alongside delivery. For example, while one increment is being built, another is being prototyped and validated with users. This integration shortens loop time from idea to insight, ensuring that learning informs delivery in near real time. On the exam, discovery often underpins scenarios about managing uncertainty. The Agile response usually emphasizes integrated exploration rather than separating phases. Agile delivery is discovery-driven, ensuring that products evolve responsively rather than being locked to initial assumptions. Quality practices are not postponed until testing phases but embedded into daily work. Automation, testability, and clear definitions of done maintain reliability even as change accelerates. For example, automated regression tests allow teams to adapt code without fear of introducing hidden defects. A robust definition of done ensures that increments are not only functional but also secure, performant, and documented. On the exam, candidates may face scenarios about balancing speed and quality. The correct Agile response usually emphasizes that quality cannot be compromised or delayed. It is built in from the beginning. Agile recognizes that frequent change requires stronger, not weaker, quality practices. Technical discipline underpins adaptability. Scaling Agile requires preserving values across multiple teams without introducing bureaucracy that erodes autonomy. Shared cadences, lightweight coordination mechanisms, and alignment on outcomes enable teams to work in harmony while remaining empowered. For example, teams may synchronize on program increments but retain autonomy over how they achieve their goals. Scaling is not about creating more hierarchy, but about sustaining coherence across many teams. On the exam, scaling scenarios often test whether candidates can preserve agility under complexity. The correct response usually emphasizes lightweight, principle-aligned coordination over heavy frameworks. Agile scales by reinforcing autonomy within alignment, ensuring that multiple teams act as a cohesive ecosystem rather than isolated silos. Servant leadership brings the mindset of enabling rather than directing. Leaders act as stewards of purpose and culture, removing impediments, clarifying intent, and nurturing capability. Instead of prescribing tasks, they empower teams to solve problems within boundaries. For example, a servant leader ensures a team has tools, support, and stakeholder clarity while stepping aside from micromanagement. On the exam, servant leadership often underpins scenarios about leadership style. The Agile response usually favors servant behaviors over command and control. Servant leadership reflects the principle that agility flourishes when leaders create conditions for success, rather than dictating how success must occur. Metrics in Agile contexts support values by elevating outcomes and learning over raw output. Instead of tracking lines of code written or hours worked, Agile teams measure customer adoption, engagement, and throughput stability. Metrics that reward activity alone encourage busy work and local optimization. For example, a team rewarded for velocity points may inflate estimates rather than increase value. On the exam, scenarios about measurement often test whether candidates recognize meaningful metrics. The Agile response usually emphasizes outcome-based measures that reflect value creation and continuous improvement. Agile metrics align incentives with principles, ensuring that behavior supports customer impact rather than superficial productivity. Anti-patterns such as cargo cult rituals and process fixation undermine Agile intent. Cargo cult rituals occur when teams go through the motions of Agile practices, like holding stand-ups or retrospectives, without applying principles. Process fixation happens when the framework becomes more important than the outcomes it serves. For example, a team may refuse to adapt sprint length even when it clearly mismatches stakeholder needs. On the exam, anti-patterns often appear in scenarios where rituals are followed mechanically. The Agile response usually involves identifying and correcting these behaviors by returning to principles. Agility is about intent, not ritual. Recognizing anti-patterns prevents stagnation and restores purpose to practices. Culture change in Agile organizations advances through visible decisions, exemplars, and consistent language. Training may introduce concepts, but it is lived behavior under pressure that cements culture. For example, when leaders prioritize sustainable pace during a crisis instead of demanding overtime, they reinforce values in practice. Culture shifts when people see values applied consistently, not only preached. On the exam, culture change often underpins scenarios about sustaining agility. The correct Agile response usually emphasizes modeling behaviors and making principle-aligned decisions. Agility becomes real when culture shifts from slogans to habits, turning principles into organizational DNA. Exam-ready reasoning is the skill of applying Agile principles to scenario questions. Candidates must recognize that exams often present multiple plausible options, but only one aligns most strongly with values like customer focus, empiricism, and ethical responsibility. For example, when faced with a choice between sticking to a plan or adapting based on evidence, the correct response is nearly always adaptation. Exam-ready reasoning requires translating abstract principles into practical judgment. On the exam, this ability separates rote memorization from true Agile competence. The Agile mindset prepares candidates to reason under constraints, selecting answers that maximize value, accelerate learning, and uphold integrity. In conclusion, the Agile mindset turns values and principles into daily practices that guide behavior in complex delivery contexts. Self-organization, reflection, and integrated discovery transform teams into learning systems. Risk, compliance, and scaling are addressed in ways that preserve agility rather than compromise it. Leadership models serve as an empowerment. Metrics emphasize outcomes over activity, and culture change emerges from lived behavior rather than slogans. On the exam, candidates succeed by reasoning from these principles, applying them to real-world scenarios with discipline and empathy. Agile values are not abstract. They are actionable guides that enable resilient delivery, strong stakeholder relationships, and outcomes that matter. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.